Brothers and sisters, listen close. Tonight is not gossip. Tonight is not a headline crafted to trend and fade. Tonight is a reckoning. From the heart of Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traore has opened a ledger that many swore did not exist, and inside it is a number that can bend the spine of a nation. 1.5 billion, not lost, not misplaced, stolen, peeled away in thin layers by old elites and their quiet partners, skimmed from contracts that never built a road, siphoned through consultancies that never wrote a page, hidden in shipments where a gram missing here and a gram missing there turned into fortunes offshore. They did not just steal money. They stole time, years of classrooms, years of clinics, years of safety for villages waiting on a road that exists only on paper. This is the moment the room goes still. Because when the receipts appear, excuses evaporate. When the light hits the books, the shadows begin to move. There are two clocks now, ticking side by side, the clock of public patience, counting in school bells and hospital shifts, and the clock of elite delay, counting in court filings and vanished files. One of them will stop first. Before this night is over, we will follow the trail, name the tricks, weigh the cost, and map the path to bring it back. Ouagadougou, late evening. The cameras click once, then fall quiet. A folder rests under the presidential seal, its edges frayed from too many hands. Captain Ibrahim Traore does not raise his voice. He raises a ledger. "Brothers and sisters," he says, "these are not rumors. These are accounts." The room leans forward. The number that follows does not float like a slogan. It lands like a weight, $1.5 billion, not lost, not misfiled, stolen over years by the machinery of the old order and the offshore shadows that fed it. The pages tell a simple, devastating story. Procurement ledgers stamped completed, where the only thing completed was the payment. Mining exports reconciled against international benchmarks, revealing ounces that vanish in the space between a weighbridge and a cargo hold. Consultancies that bill 3 to 5% of every major contract, yet cannot produce a single deliverable beyond an invoice. The documents are dry. The meaning is not. In rows and columns, you can read the years that classrooms never opened, the medicines that never reached a clinic, the footbridges that never crossed the flood. The account begins with phantom projects, public works that exist in files and press releases, but not in the world. A rural road certified at 98% completion, though satellite images show only a scraped line washed out by the first rains. A district hospital delivered with change orders that triple the cost, except the foundation was never poured. The pattern repeats across ministries. The same 4 or 5 contractors, the same guarantors, the same emergency exemptions that suspend competition for speed, and the same penalties quietly waived when deadlines pass. Every signature looks official. Every outcome is empty. Then the pages shift color, from gray public works to gold and dust. Under-invoiced exports are not loud crimes. They are crimes of decimals. A gram skimmed per bar, a discount quietly offered to secure market access, a royalty calculated on a price that lags the world by just enough to make a fortune offshore. It is the kind of theft that hides not in a briefcase, but in the spread between 2 numbers on 2 screens. When Treasury reconciles mine output with customs declarations and global spot prices, the shortfall does not shout, it accumulates. It becomes the dull, relentless drumbeat that marches toward the billion mark. Next comes the layer that always smells of cologne and non-disclosure, advisory and intermediary fees. A loan negotiated at favorable terms that carries a placement fee. A contract facilitated by a firm with a P.O. box address. Consultancy retainers that mirror one another across ministries, each fixed at a neat percentage, each routed through a different shell, each justified as strategic. Ask for the work product and you receive a slide deck recycled from one country to the next, with names swapped and logos changed. Ask who owns the shells and you're told it's proprietary. Ask who signed, and the pen traces back to the revolving door where officials retire into the very firms that advised them. Nothing illegal in the sentence, something immoral in the paragraph. For years, auditors tried to follow the money and found that the paper trail kept turning into smoke. Files misplaced, servers under maintenance, officers transferred. Tonight, the smoke thins. The reconciliation that Traore lays on the table was not done in one room. It was stitched across many, between treasury cash books and customs manifests, between central bank transaction logs and the silent testimony of whistleblowers whose courage looks ordinary until you learn what it costs. This is not a witch hunt, he says evenly. This is a reconciliation of accounts. The word reconciliation is doing its full work. Not only numbers reconciled to numbers, but a government reconciled to its people. The press tries the old questions. Why now? Why this sum? Why this tone? The answer is prosaic and explosive because the data now speaks. Over the last months, access improved, systems digitized, cross-checks once blocked are now routine. The ledger is not perfect, but it is precise enough to be undeniable. Patterns emerge even when names are redacted. The same contractors appear under different brands. The same beneficial owners hide behind different documents. The same projects change names to outrun their histories. If you trace the lines across years, they converge like rivers into the private reservoirs of a handful of families and their foreign confederates. Yet the speech is careful. No list of villains. No theater of arrests. The emphasis remains on systems, how they were designed or allowed to be gamed. We will not replace one impunity with another, the voice continues. We will replace concealment with clarity. The plan, he hints, is not a midnight purge, but a daylight process. Freeze where justified, compel disclosures, trigger mutual legal assistance, publish what the law permits, protect those who step forward with evidence. In a country tired of spectacles, the promise of procedure sounds almost radical. The room senses the friction that will follow. The elites will not surrender quietly. Already sources say the arguments are forming. The numbers are exaggerated, the methods politicized, the consequences anti-investment. Injunctions are being drafted, PR lines rehearsed. Off-the-record briefings arranged to cast suspicion on the reconcilers rather than the reconciled. Somewhere a hard drive is being wiped, a SIM card snapped in half, a passport renewed. But there is another current in the city tonight. Outside the compound, grief turns into a kind of math. People begin to count not in dollars, but in lives. The school year that could have started on time. The maternity ward that could have had power. The squad that could have had radios when the call came. Markets murmur, mosques and churches whisper. The diaspora calls in, asking one question that carries many others inside it. If this is true, how do we help bring it back? 2 clocks start to tick, one in courtrooms, one in kitchens. The clock of delay, motions filed, meetings postponed, memories suddenly unclear, and the clock of patience, measured in school bells and hospital shifts, in the length of a rainy season and the width of a harvest. One of these clocks will stop first. What happens next depends on which one we feed, the old habit of looking away or the new habit of looking in. The ledger on the table is not a finale. It is an invitation. Follow the trail, understand the tricks, measure the cost, and then, calmly, relentlessly, bring it back. Ouagadougou. If Task 1 showed the ledger, Task 2 shows the machinery. The money did not vanish in a magic trick. It walked out through doors propped open by habits, loopholes, and paperwork that looked legal enough to pass a quick glance. What follows is not a gallery of villains, but an operating manual of how a nation can be drained without a single sack of cash ever crossing a sidewalk. Chapter 1. The Procurement Carousel. It begins where most public money begins: tenders. The documents say competition. The outcomes say choreography. For a decade, a familiar circle of companies rotated in and out of winning positions. The names changed, one letter here, a new logo there, but beneficial ownership traced back to the same hands. Terms of reference were written with such precise technical specs that only those insiders could qualify. When an outsider tried, the ground shifted under their feet. Deadlines moved, requirements multiplied, deposit guarantees ballooned. On paper, everything looked strict. In practice, the strictness served to keep the circle tight. Here is the move you must learn to recognize. A project is declared urgent. Bridges must be built before the rains, clinics before the election, and emergency procurement is invoked. Competition pauses for speed. Prices lift quietly. Change orders arrive as predictably as monsoon clouds, adding unexpected soil conditions, unforeseen utility relocations, necessary scope expansions. Each change is small enough to be defensible. Together they triple the cost. The project reaches 60%, then 85%, then a neat 98% on paper. The rains arrive. The road washes out. Another emergency is declared. Chapter 2. The Consultancy Siphon. Wherever a big contract moves, it drags consultants behind it like a comet's tail. Advisory fees, facilitation fees, success fees. Percentages that appear modest until you realize they attach to everything. The firm addresses point to office parks and P.O. boxes. The deliverables could be stapled in 15 minutes. A market analysis, copied from a neighboring country. A risk memo, rephrased from last year's. Ask who authorized the fees, and you find signatures that used to belong to public servants, now reinvented as partners. The carousel isn't just in construction, it spins in paperwork too. The genius of the consultancy siphon is its manners. No shouting, no envelopes under tables. It smiles in boardrooms, writes invoices with correct spelling, and speaks the language of efficiency and strategic alignment. If you audit the account, you might not find theft. You will find a policy vacuum that allowed costs to grow like vines around every public decision. The vine doesn't look dangerous until you see the tree underneath is starving for light. Chapter 3. The Gold of Missing Grams. In mining, theft is polite. It hides in decimals and delays. 1 gram missing per bar is nothing to a casual eye. Multiplied by tens of thousands of bars, it becomes a line item that can tilt a budget. Under-invoicing is sold as market access. The buyer gets a discount to secure long-term partnership. The seller gets stability. The difference between the quoted price and the global benchmark doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like a courtesy. Courtesy accumulates. The nation's royalty, calculated on the lower number, shrinks. The surplus, captured quietly by traders with better phones, lands where the taxman cannot see. There is another trick. Timing. Declare your sale when the price dips. Ship when the price rises. Reconcile later with paperwork that blends the two. By the time the Treasury matches output to customs and customs to bank receipts, the trail is legal, the loss is real, and the beneficiaries are already diversifying into real estate far from the pit. Chapter 4. The Tax Holiday. That never ends. At first, exemptions made sense. Attract investors, kickstart sectors, forgive duties on equipment that brings jobs. Then the holiday became a lifestyle. Temporary exemptions extended in the quiet corridors between budget seasons. Whole categories of imports lived under a sky where tax never fell, fuel for fleets that didn't exist, equipment that entered the country once on paper and many times in practice. For every exemption, a justification. For every justification, a friend. The treasury bled not by one wound, but by 100 mosquito bites, none fatal alone, devastating together. Chapter 5. The State-Owned Enterprise Drain. Where the state held companies, the pattern repeated in miniature. Ghost workers drew salaries. Fuel cards multiplied like rumors. Procurement inside the enterprise mirrored procurement outside. The same 4 vendors, the same polite fees, the same late-night emails approving urgent orders. There is a particular cruelty here. SOEs were often created to carry services the private sector would not. Water to distant towns, transport on unprofitable routes. When they are drained, the poor pay twice. Once in the taxes that feed the enterprise, twice in the services that fail when the enterprise collapses. Chapter 6. The Banking Layer. You will be told that every transfer was approved, every correspondent account compliant. That may be true. Compliance can be a narrow door. Funds circled as trade payments for equipment, spares, consulting bundles, routed through respectable intermediaries in cities that look clean from the air. The pattern is not one illegal act. It is the orchestration of legal acts to an immoral end. In another context, that orchestration wins awards. Here, it moves schools and clinics into the future tense. Why didn't auditors stop it? Because capture is not only a political word, it is a technical one. Oversight offices were underfunded and overruled. Key posts rotated just when a trail grew warm. Court cases stalled not in verdicts, but in calendars. Where digitization could have exposed patterns, systems remained analog by design. Paper gets lost, servers never do, unless someone prefers paper, and when brave auditors pushed anyway, their rewards were transfers, not promotions. What changed? Now, a small revolution that looks boring from the outside, reconciliations became routine instead of rare. Customs, Treasury, the central bank, and the mining inspectorate began to share data in standard formats. Whistleblowers found doors that opened instead of closing. The result is not a perfect picture, but it is finally a picture. When you layer tenders over beneficial ownership records, when you layer shipment dates over price curves, when you layer exemptions over political calendars, shapes appear. Those shapes do not accuse a person, they accuse a system. The cost measured in ordinary time. At this point in the story, the numbers have made their point. What they cannot do is hold your hand while you browse a pharmacy shelf that's empty or wait at a ferry that never runs because the boat is under maintenance for the 3rd season in a row. The theft took money, yes. But like all long cons, it took something quieter. It normalized waiting. You did not protest each delay because the delay was always wrapped in a plausible explanation. Businesses learned to price in the pause. Citizens learned to lower the bar. Corruption's final victory is not a yacht. It is a shrug. The turn that shrug is ending. When Traore uses the word reconciliation, he is not just balancing ledgers, he is recalibrating expectations. The nation is moving from rumor to record, from vibes to verification. The old arguments, everyone does it, nothing can be proved. It's complicated. Sound thin in a room where sheets of numbers sit under steady light. The next phase will be slower than a headline and faster than the old normal. Freezes where due, disclosures compelled, mutual legal assistance sent with teeth, a public allowed to read what the law allows it to read. There are still 2 clocks on the wall. Delay knows the courts, the committees, the comfortable rhythms of come back next week. Patience knows the school bell, the clinic shift, the price of millet. When citizens understand the mechanics, they stop being an audience and start being auditors. And auditors, when watched by citizens, remember who they serve. That is how 1.5b stops being a story and starts being a sum that moves in the right direction, home. By morning, the talking points arrive, polished and predictable. The figure is exaggerated. The methodology is political learning. Investor confidence is at risk. The same phrases surface on different channels, read by different voices, funded by the same interests. A briefing note circulates in embassies. Keep calm, wait it out, frame this as a populist wave. In the legal quarter, draft injunctions multiply like photocopies, requests to seal records, to halt asset freezes, to protect commercial secrets. Delay is the sharpest tool because it cuts without leaving fingerprints. Inside ministries, the resistance is quieter. A server goes down on the day a query is due. A file cannot be located because the officer who kept it was transferred. A committee meets without quorum, then reschedules when the news cycle cools. People who once moved paper with speed now discover the value of slow. You can hear the gears grinding. Not broken, just sanded with caution. But the city hears something else. Markets talk before newspapers do. In taxi queues and courtyards, the number 1.5b becomes a measuring stick. You can see people comparing it to life, to school fees, to sacks of grain, to the price of a bus route that never seemed to pay for itself. A women's cooperative meets under a mango tree and decides to keep receipts for every bag of millet they sell. Because, if we can be precise, they can be precise. A veterans group posts a statement. We fought for a flag, not for a loophole. In diaspora chats, professionals volunteer weekends to translate the audit summary into infographics their parents can read on a basic phone. The counterattack adapts. A subset of commentators try a different angle, not denial, but dilution. Corruption is everywhere, they sigh. This is just how the world works. It's a clever poison because it tastes like realism. Yet against the new habit of verification, it curdles. People have seen the reconciliation sheets. They don't need perfect, they need possible. Possible looks like numbers that line up. There is pressure at the edges. A procurement officer receives a midnight call reminding him who paid for his scholarship. A junior accountant is offered a transfer and an envelope for family needs. A mining foreman is told to check the calibration of his scale until the reading looks friendly. This is the old order asking, politely at first if the new order is serious. The reply comes not as thunder, but as paperwork with spine. A circular mandates that any request to seal records must include a public summary within the law's limits. A small unit, new, unglamorous, relentless, begins cross-referencing court schedules with asset movement alerts. When a suspicious account tries to shift funds at 3 a.m., a freeze lands before sunrise. Narrow, justified, appealable, but in place. It is not a spectacle. It is a signal. Procedure will be used for the public, not only against it. Then the turn. A ledger page, thought missing, appears from an unexpected source. An employee who has watched 3 directors come and go without changing the angle of the desk. The page is unremarkable except for what it makes possible. It connects a consultancy invoice to a shell company, and the shell to a loan placement, and the loan to a contract whose change orders never stopped. The chain is legal enough to stand and wrong enough to explain. The story doesn't require villains. The pattern convicts the process. Journalists who have been careful, almost cautious, now find room to be brave, not with adjectives, with documents. They pair before and after satellite shots of a completed road. They print side-by-side royalty calculations with and without the mysterious discount. They interview a nurse who keeps a ledger as neatly as any treasury clerk. Births, gloves, hours, without power. She does not shout. She simply points to rows that should not be empty. The two clocks return to view. The clock of delay keeps perfect time in court filings and committee schedules. The clock of patience keeps human time in shifts and seasons. The public begins to feed the second clock with attention, attending hearings, reading summaries, asking for updates without rage but without rest. That quiet pressure changes the air in rooms where decisions are made. Even those who preferred the old rhythm feel a new metronome in the walls. By month's end, the narrative has shifted. Not because a miracle occurred, but because repetition worked. Receipts, not rumors. Reconciliation, not performance. The counterattack is still active, sophisticated, well-resourced, comfortable in labyrinths. But the nation is learning the maze, and once a people learns the layout, shortcuts appear where walls used to be. Numbers are clean, needs are not. To understand the weight of 1.5B, you have to walk it. Picture a nurse in a district clinic at dusk. The generator coughs, then goes silent. She chooses between running the vaccine fridge or the lights in the delivery room. She rinses a pair of gloves to make them last until morning and writes in her ledger, because writing is the only power she controls. Picture a class under a neem tree. 70 children, 20 books. The teacher keeps rhythm with chalk and patience. Rain clouds end the lesson, not the bell. The road to school is listed as completed in a ministry file. The mud says otherwise. Picture a farmer staring at a river that swells every rainy season. The map shows a bridge, a beautiful line connecting his village to a market he can almost hear on clear mornings. The bridge holds firm in the brochure. In real life, people cross with their trousers on their heads and their radios wrapped in plastic. Now translate 1.5B into ordinary time. It looks like maternity wards with stable power through the night. It looks like textbooks that smell of glue and possibility. It looks like roads that survive the second year, not just the first. It looks like radios crackling on the right frequency when a patrol calls for help and expects an answer. There is also the cost you cannot map. The education delayed by a year becomes a career never started. The clinic without supplies becomes a funeral too quiet to count. The bridge that exists only in a plan becomes a price hike that ripples through a market no one can see. Corruption is often described as a crime against money. It is a crime against time. It steals the years in which a child's talent might ripen, the seasons in which a town might grow, the nights in which a mother might rest without counting heartbeats. When people hear recovery, they think of wire transfers and court orders. That is part of it. But recovery should also be measured in reopened wards, in teachers hired, in kilometers that stop being red lines on maps and start being dust on shoes. The audit ledger matters. The people's ledger matters more. So as reforms take shape, the country begins to draft a parallel document. Not just what was taken, but what will be built. A covenant of specifics, clinic by clinic, school by school, culvert by culvert, so that every citizen can point to a page and say, when the money returns, this is where time will return with it. Recovery is not a headline. It is a checklist. First 30 days. Create a narrowly scoped recovery task force with 3 powers and 3 limits. Powers: freeze assets with probable cause and judicial oversight, compel disclosures of beneficial ownership for entities that received public funds, and request mutual legal assistance where cross-border trails begin. Limits: public reporting every 2 weeks, strict appeal windows, and an independent ombud to handle complaints of overreach. Publish the reconciliation methodology so citizens can test it, criticize it, improve it. Day 31 to 60. Move the mining sector from trust to verification. Institute third-party assay at the point of export. Publish daily royalty calculations. Peg declarations to a transparent price index with time stamps so timing games lose their margin. Require every operator to file machine-readable contracts with redactions allowed only as the law demands and always accompanied by plain language summaries. Train inspectors who rotate across sites so familiarity does not become a favor. Day 61 to 90. Reset procurement. Launch an e-tender portal where specs are public, questions and answers are logged, and bid openings are streamed in real time. Stand up a beneficial ownership registry that links companies to people, not just directors, but real controllers. Debar serial offenders who hop brands but keep behavior. Mandate random external audits that pick projects by lottery, not by politics. Treasury. Continuously. Digitize what corruption loves to keep analog. Replace cash per diems with verifiable transfers. Publish a monthly cash book versus budget snapshot in a format a high school student can read. Let citizens subscribe to line items. If you care about rural clinics, you can receive an alert when a payment posts or a variance appears. Bureaucrats will dislike the noise. The public will create signal out of it. Protection and incentives. Make whistleblowing safer than silence. Guarantee anonymity. Offer proportional rewards for recoveries. And penalize retaliation with teeth. Demotions reversed. Damages paid personally by retaliators, not by the public purse. Pair this with amnesty windows for minor actors who disclose schemes early. The goal is not vengeance, but prevention. Bridging the gap. Even with freezes and returns, cash flow lags. Issue a small patriotic bond, transparent use of proceeds, modest yield, ring-fence to clinics, classrooms, culverts. Invite the diaspora to purchase with pride and scrutiny. Publish a live dashboard of every franc spent, the People's Ledger. Each quarter, release a public report that pairs 2 lists, funds recovered, with sources and legal status, and projects delivered, with locations and photos. The point is not to boast, it is to teach cause and effect. When citizens can trace a return to a roof, skepticism turns into supervision, and supervision is how reform survives its honeymoon. Reform, finally, is culture expressed as routine. When the extraordinary becomes ordinary, when open bidding is boring and daily royalty posts feel like weather, then the system begins to tilt in favor of honesty not by grace, but by gravity. That is the destination, a country where corruption is not impossible, just inconvenient, and integrity is not heroic, just expected. Conclusion. Call, choice, covenant. We began with a folder and a number. We end with a choice and a promise. The choice is between 2 clocks, still ticking on the wall. The clock of delay speaks fluent procedure and can outlast a news cycle with a yawn. The clock of patience speaks human time. Babies born at night, classes that need books by morning, roads that must hold when the river rises. Which clock stops first depends on what we feed, secrecy or sunlight, cynicism or attention. Here is the covenant, plain and public. The government will publish what it can, when it can, in formats that citizens can read and contest. The Recovery Task Force will act with speed and submit to oversight with humility. The reforms will be measured not by slogans, but by service. Clinics lit at midnight, teachers at their posts in the rain, culverts holding on the second storm. And the people, scattered across neighborhoods and continents, will be more than an audience. They will be auditors, investors, witnesses, brothers and sisters. The ledger on the table no longer belongs to a few. It belongs to a nation that refuses to shrug. If you have a story that fills a gap, bring it. If you have a skill that tightens a control, lend it. If you have a doubt, aim it like a flashlight at the numbers and watch what stands and what scatters. Then, say the words that turn anger into action and regret into repair. Bring it back and build what should have been built with the years we still have.